Special thanks to our promotional partners at the American Philatelic Society.
The APS is the largest stamp collecting organization in the world, supporting collectors of any level worldwide.
For more information about membership and APS services, visit stamps.org.
Hi, I'm Michael Cortese of Noble Spirit in Pittsfield, New Hampshire.
And I'm Charles Epting of H.R. Harmer in New York City.
And this is Conversations with Philatelists. So Charles, I'm super excited about our guest today. He is a two-time Champion of Champions winner, one of the most esteemed collectors in the hobby.
We're speaking to Gordon Eubanks today, who is an incredible collector, but more than that, I think just an incredible asset for the hobby. Because, you could rattle off all of his actually, he hasn't won that many competitions because as soon as he shows something, it wins. And then he can't show it again. So he hasn't exhibited as much as most people work for years and years and years to try to get that, coveted grand award. And Gordon just kind of once or twice, and then
walks in. I'll take that.
Basically, when you've got a collection like his, it's hard to vote for anybody else, I would say. But more than that, I got to know Gordon through his involvement with the U.S. Philatelic Classic Society, who were my sponsor for my fellowship with the APS. It was the Classic Society. So I got very involved in that society and got to know these collectors who were just leagues and leagues above where I was at or still am at. But Gordon is one of the guys I got to know because he's so involved in that society. He's the bourse chairman for Westpec, so he's my point of contact when dealing with Westpec's booths and everything. So he's not just a collector who then shuns the rest of the hobby. He's a collector who really gives back and is involved and is just, I think he's just a fantastic asset for the hobby. I think we could use a lot more people like Gordon, and the hobby would be, a lot, not that it's not a great place, but like the more of him we have, the better.
Right. A well-spoken proponent of the hobby, just a staunch supporter of anything philatelic.
Absolutely. I'm excited to speak to him. I'm so used to see, he's said it's about a lot of people, but I'm so used to seeing him at shows. Like you end up seeing Gordon every month or two, whether it's in Florida or Chicago or San Francisco, that haven't gone this long without seeing these familiar faces. Cheryl a couple weeks ago. It's always nice to catch up with them, even if via Zoom.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's bring him in.
Hello, Gordon.
Hi.
Thanks for taking the time to meet with us.
Yeah, no problem.
How are things going in quarantine for you? Have you had much time to focus on collecting?
Probably all I do. We're really lucky because in our whole zip code there have been 10 cases.
Wow.
And actually we're right next to Carmel, and that's even better considering the population. So it's pretty... What's
the population for that?
I think it's like 4,000 in our unincorporated area and maybe 15,000. I don't know what Carmel is, but
that's pretty good.
But on the other hand, if you go to the other side of the county, you get huge numbers of cases in Salinas and Central Valley or the Salinas Valley. So anyway, we're lucky. Just boring. I don't know if there'll be another stamp show for months.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys think.
Dana said they're trying to do the March Chicago ASDA show, but they have a limit of 50 people in a room at one time, so it looks like they're going to have to cancel that. I would be shocked if anything happens before summer.
We're still holding on with Westpex for late April. But it depends to some extent on how the vaccine goes, I think, and whether people get their act together here and wear masks and social distance. I mean, this is not rocket science.
Yeah.
No, it's it was interesting that St. Louis seemed to be a step in the right direction, I suppose, and from there it's been sort of a stalemate.
Well, they had a show in Houston last week, or this weekend, I guess, whatever day it is now. Steve Taylor was there. Labor and Harris was there. Steve's a big advocate. He flies from London. I don't know if you know
Yeah.
Steve, but I think everyone probably knows him. But we're going to try to do WestPEX, but I'm thinking we might be smart to move it into May if we can. So we'll see.
Yeah, fingers crossed. It didn't need to be this. It didn't need to be this difficult. Yeah, if everybody had just.
It didn't need to be this difficult. You're right.
Well, Gordon, to kick things off, can you talk a little bit about your entry into the hobby? Because I'm sure a lot of people know you now as as a CFC winner and a world-renowned collector. But how did you get your start? What was your sort of entry point into the hobby? Did you start as a young kid? Did it take you later in life to discover philately? What's your own sort of personal journey?
Well, like a lot of people, I started as a kid. My mother was a collector as a kid, and the family rumor has it that my grandfather was quite a collector. They lived in China for 10 years, back when the river boats were going up and down and suppressing the Chinese. So they were in a little place called Tientsin, and the rumor is he had the world's greatest collection of Chinese stamps. I'm sure in those times you could buy some pretty amazing stuff. However, there's not a single record of this. So he may have had a collection. I doubt it was a world famous collection. But anyway, so my mother was a collector, and I started as a kid, maybe in 4th grade. We moved to England before I started 4th grade, and my father was covering all of Europe for a technology company. And so I got a lot of foreign stamps. I'd soak them off, put them in an album. And then my brother also collected, and we would collect US in our later teens. But I didn't do much until then. The early 90s was the next time I started. I was working for a software company, and we had a product, and it turned out that this dealer used this piece of software, and so I started working with Alan Katz.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I started working with Alan and his wife. They would actually come by the house sometimes on the way to WestPEX and spend a day or two, and so I really started buying. And then in Washington, in the show in Washington, I had 5 frames or 4 frames, a number of frames of classic US, which sort of surprised people. There's some interesting pieces in that collection. And then I kind of got a lot more involved. That was the year Bill Gross showed his U.S. classics, not his 47s, but his U.S. classics, and one, Steve Walski, I think, had the best, had a pretty good exhibit also. Charles Shreve really ran the Gross effort. And Charles is amazing. I think he had a reception for the judges at the NPM or something that year. But anyway, that's how I really got started.
And when it came time for you to specialize in something, at least my impression is that going with classic US and specifically the 47s and 51s is a very daunting task, especially when there's Bill Grosses out there and people like Joseph Hackney collecting. Did that intimidate you at all? Did you shy away from this challenge, or did you did that drive you even further into making a decision to specialize in again such a daunting field of philately?
I don't think I really was cognizant of that. I don't think I was really focused on the fact that I knew Bill Gross and Hackney, and there were others who were paying, huge amounts of money. Alan would find really great stuff. So a couple of things happened, but I wasn't thinking of being an exhibitor. I was just collecting. So for a while, I've gone from, as a kid, the worldwide stuff to focus just on the US. I had an album. I tried to fill the album. I had a used album and a mint album and the usual stuff. And then when I met Alan, who was a smart guy, he saw the fact that the lower priced US wasn't a very good business for him. So he got me focused on better stuff. And he sold me my first cover that I ever owned, a 47 cover, I think from the BB Correspondence. And so I began to focus on this, and it was all in a safe. And he convinced me that I should do more than just put it in a safe, that I should organize it. At that point, I was collecting all the classics through the 69s. And I kept collecting the 69s for some time. But the biggest thing that happened, it was extremely lucky, beyond lucky, was that Alan had bought the Waterbury collection from one of the guy that wrote the book on it. He had passed away. He bought it from his widow. And he didn't want to keep this 20K asset in his safe. So he sold it to me. And that was great, because now I wish I had that collection of Waterburys today, because they're with fancy cans, they're a lot more valuable. But at the same time, his name's going to escape me, the guy that lived on Long Island, the lawyer who passed away. He'd been a lawyer in the trials in Germany after World War II. He'd worked there. That's why he put together an amazing German states collection. Boker.
John Boker.
So Boker decided he wanted to collect fancy cancels. And so he offered to buy it, and I wasn't that interested. I wasn't looking to sell stuff. But he kept piling stuff up. I mean, and finally Alan called and said, you can do what you want, but what he's offering is worth 10 times what these are. And so basically Boker gave me every one of his 1851s through 1861, all of them, in trade for this. And again, that was so lucky. It contained things like the strip of 3 with the number 5, the 99R2, on and on and on in the InPerf. And then, so I decided at that point to focus on the InPerf 51s and the 49s. I didn't get any 49s from Boker because he'd already sold them all to Gross. Otherwise, he probably would have thrown all those in too. He's a funny guy. He just wanted this stuff. I talked to him once. I was changing trains on Long Island, and I don't do a lot of train travel, and so I was on a payphone. It was the only time I ever talked to him for 2 minutes, and he said, "You're going to regret it if you turn this down. I'm through negotiating." Yeah, true story. So fortunately, I used some common sense. So that was an incredible opportunity. And then Alan sold all the perforated stuff. And I kept all the InPerf that came from that, and continued to buy InPerf 47s and 51s, and 69s. And that's what was shown at Washington. I still have the scans of the pages. In those days, though, you didn't have scanners, so I had to go to some copy center. Well, first they didn't really, they kept pushing Alan off. We had to beg to get some frames. I mean, these were the Newbery covers. The block of 6 was 90 cent. The InPerf block, the unused block of the 90 cent 69. There's some amazing stuff there. So I went down to the copy center, put them on the thing, copied them at these things, and and then finally did the exhibit. And so anyway, that's probably more than you needed, but that's how I got into it. And I just kept adding. I got to know Scott Treppel pretty well. He was helpful. Matter of fact, they came out, he and his then new girlfriend came out for Thanksgiving. And we got to know Katie, who's awesome. She's great. She's a lot of fun. So anyway, Scott has been very helpful, and Alan was extremely helpful. Charles, all these people, even Pillar, Stanley. It's a lot of help.
So how many years did you exhibit for before you won the first Champion of Champions?
Not long. I think that of all the exhibiting, I haven't exhibited that much because they both won the Grand the second time they were showing each of the two exhibits. And then for the CSC, I exhibited and didn't win. I won. I didn't win and I won. I think it was like I was in 4 CSCs. I mean, I was very lucky. I was the right place at the right time, and it was a good collection. I mean, I think back then more than now, judging favored the classics in the U.S. But then I've been on a streak of losing. I mean, I lost in Stockholm to Dan had his amazing exhibit on Confederate one. And then I lost in Prague to Hackney. He's a great guy. I don't know. Do you know him? Have you ever hung out with him?
I've met Joseph a couple of times, mainly at European shows, and he's a riot. He's
a piece of work.
He's one of a kind.
So anyway, that's how I but I started exhibiting. I think after the first time, the only time I lost to a U.S. collector was in the U.S. was to Mark Schwartz when he won in St. Louis with his some collection. It wasn't Boston, it was the other Massachusetts collection.
Something I think is interesting. There's a lot of collectors who like to keep a low profile. They exhibit, they buy, they're out there. But not everyone becomes that actively involved in the hobby. I got to know you first through your involvement in the Classic Society. You have Westpex that you run. You're the Bourse chairman for Westpex. Is that your?
Yeah, I don't run Westpex.
You're very involved in.
There's an amazing group of people. Westpex is got probably the largest show committee, and they really have people do a lot of work. I just deal with the dealers, which I really enjoy. This is a tough time for dealers right now with the pandemic.
What was it that inspired you to become involved in the social and organized side of philately as well? Because again, you could have just collected and exhibited one CFC and again kept a low profile like many people do, but you're very much plugged in. What led you to that?
Well, one, I really like the people. We have a lot of really good friends who are in the hobby, and they're just amazingly fun. My wife, I'm sure, would prefer to hang out with Ian and Stefan than with me.
We just talked to him about appearing on an episode. He's going to join us in a week or two.
Now, that'll be a much more interesting episode. We've done a Zoom call with him from his hot tub in somewhere. But there are a lot of great people in the hobby, and they're fun to hang out with. And I enjoy that a lot. And I think that's really the driving force. And, Wade has been very aggressive in getting me involved in a lot of stuff, as he has done with dozens of other people for the hobby. And I like the travel. I like the European shows. I mean, really.
Yeah.
I got to go speak in London one time. I mean, that was amazing. The Collectors Club, the London Club. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
The hobby's a great excuse to get us out of the house and out of the office for things like that.
It really is. Um, and there's groups now that get together on Zoom and chat just periodically. Mostly now I've been spending time with Prexis and with World War II airmail in the Southern Atlantic. A lot of people don't know that, but I have a whole Prexi exhibit that I have put together during the pandemic.
What are the similarities and differences if you were to compare the imperforate U.S. issues with the Prexis? I'm sure there's things in the Prexi era that are just as rare and just as hard to come by, but a tiny fraction of the cost. But how does it stack up for you? Do you find yourself applying a lot of the same methodologies and philosophies to collecting these issues that are separated by almost 100 years?
Well, it's really easy to collect the classics. I mean, it's not very complicated. It's just some of them are very expensive. But really, if you have an unlimited budget and the stuff becomes available, it's very easy. The Prexis are complicated. There is a lot of detail. I was just, there's an article in the current issue of the U.S. Stamp Society publication on the 10-cent coil, which is very rare, Prexi. I mean, that's a really rare Prexi, but they're talking about how a lot of the coils are really rare. I was just emailing with Steve Taylor about this subject this morning, about no one thinks about how rare some of these coils are, like the 1.5 cent coil. You just think you must find those in the dime box, but you really don't, not properly used on cover. So it's complicated. There's a lot of rates and situations. I mean, who'd ever heard of a consignee cover? Have you heard of a consignee cover? There's a rate for this. This is when a ship was taking a load of merchandise and there was a letter with the thing and it's stamped consignee. I mean, it's just interesting. There's just lots and lots of really interesting stuff about Prexis, and a lot of great collections you can study copies are available. So, and then in the South Atlantic, that redefines complicated. During World War II, the mail that went from the U.S. through the Southern Atlantic and in through Africa and out to China. I mean, a lot of people don't know that the U.S. was providing resources to China. China had hundreds of thousands of Japanese troops they were holding off. And if they'd overrun China, these troops would have headed to the Pacific. I mean, it could have. Some people have heard about the Himalayas going over the hump with these airplanes, but the real story is fascinating, and the covers are fascinating. The rates kept changing. So anyway, I find this stuff much harder. I mean,
and a great classic cover, it's going to make itself known. You're going to see it in auction. Everybody's going to know. But I'm sure that some of the great Prexi covers have gone unidentified and unappreciated for decades.
A small group. So one thing is Prexis don't appear in auctions because in general, even though they may be uncommon, they don't sell for that much. So I've been really pressing one of my friends in the auction business let's do a Prexi auction. Let's really, because I have like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of covers that are probably not going to be in my exhibit to get back in there. And as to grow the hobby, you need to have more entry level. You can't expect to find people like Bill Gross who can just give Charles basically a blank check to build. He built a great collection. I still think his exhibit was really amazing. The one that didn't win in Australia, didn't win in Brazil or South America. he had a great exhibit, but I mean, it took five sales of just to sell his U.S. stuff,
Yeah.
right? And his English and all these collections. It's too bad he wasn't more involved. You know, he could have shown up a few times. I think it would have made a big difference.
Yeah.
You talk about how judging has changed and how the certainly used to be I'd say more respect given to a classic exhibit. As exhibiting becomes more about storytelling and as opinions towards exhibiting change, do you think there's a shot? And I know there's been some controversy with the George Brett Cup being sort of a consolation prize for the 20th century exhibit. Do you think there's a chance of a Prexy exhibit or anything else from that era ever winning CFC? Do you think that the pendulum will ever swing that far into the 20th century's direction?
Yeah, I think the 20th century exhibit will win the CSC. I do. I mean, it's no doubt. I was actually involved in the original discussions to start the Brett Cup. It was the interest of a few people were off for a weekend to talk about stuff. And I don't think it's a substitute, though, for the CFC. I really don't. But the exhibit, the Prexy exhibit that Rumsey sold recently, I mean, that large lot was an amazing collection in itself. I mean, I'm not sure that they exactly identified the best pieces to sell individually, but I think that collections like that will continue to do well. It's a difficult issue because the classics are really cool and I would think would draw people. They want people to be showing classic exhibits. Some people have quit exhibiting because they didn't like the way the judging went. The judging has changed. I mean, what people, they're really much more, well, like the story, the idea of a story. I have a hard time getting excited about that. I mean, a lot of this stuff, there isn't a story. There's not a real story on either any of my exhibits. It's just, except maybe the stuff I'm working on with the South Atlantic. But the more I learn, the more I realize that it's just, I still don't have it right. I mean, it's pretty, and there's debate. You ever read Ken Lawrence's piece on the FAM 22? It's an amazing document, but there's all these societies that study this stuff, that the censors and all this. I mean, it's a very complex, and I can't imagine why that area couldn't be just as successful as the classic U.S. I really can't imagine why it wouldn't be.
It'll almost allow more people into competitive exhibiting if they don't have the, you talk about the Prexy coils being rare and the everything else, but it almost allows other people who don't necessarily have the budget for massive, just like you said, write a blank check to compete in alongside people who can.
Exactly. I should have said that. I mean, the real goal here is to get more people exhibiting, and you can't do it if you can't afford this stuff. So while Prexys are rare, I mean, for a Prexy cover to go for $5K or $6K,
yeah, the
only ones I know of that have sold like that are the covers on the Pan Am flight to Hawaii on December 7th. It was, outside of Hawaii. They diverted it to Kona. Those covers, but they're actually things a lot rarer than that, but they're not as popular. But there's also some people who you think of as real classic collectors that do collect 20th century stuff World War II, and people you wouldn't think of.
Even when
A lot of people don't know I collect this stuff.
And Wade was one of the first people we spoke to, and he
Mhm.
obviously has his liberties and everything that he played around in. So, do you find that it almost reminds you of why you started collecting in the first place? When you have something new and fresh, and when you're collecting the classics, there's been so much research done on the 47, so much research done on the 51s. It must feel like at times there's nothing new to learn or uncover. Whereas when you're dealing with the FAM flights and World War II interruptions of mail, does that sort of give you that same rush that first got you collecting stamps in the first place?
For sure, and even more. I mean, there's some really interesting stuff that hasn't been totally sorted through. And people get in these arguments about what FAM 22 is, and I'm not sure that some of these arguments are really that differentiated in what they're trying to say. It's more of a approach to the discussing it. But clearly, flights went through Miami, but they also came out of New York. There's I believe 11 routes that were carried out in the Atlantic, Southern and Middle Atlantic. These flying boats would go down to Brazil and then go back and forth for maybe 5 trips to Africa, carrying mail and supplies, and then go back to Baltimore, where the engines had to be rebuilt. It's really sad there are none of these planes left. I think that would be I'd much rather fly across the Atlantic in one of those flying boats than I would take, say, the Queen Elizabeth or something. I think that probably would have been rough. They didn't fly that high, and they didn't go that fast. I mean, it was just a different world. So there's a lot to learn. But this isn't true in so many 20th century areas. I mean, look at the coils and the amount of work that's gone into understanding the coils.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really amazing area, the early U.S. coils.
It seems like there's still so much waiting to be done. And you've got a lot of the early issues are plated, all of the rates are known, all of the it seems like that work was pioneered decades ago, and now it's fun to find segments of the hobby that are more or less completely untapped still.
Yeah. So you
Right.
say there's no auctions selling Prexies in the kind of way that you'd like to buy. Where are you finding the items for your exhibit that you're building?
There's a few dealers who have specialized in it. And then Rumsey occasionally has them. Treppel sometimes sells a Prexy or two. But dealers around the country have them, but it's been a very close-knit group of people where I think as more exposure, the more people could collect them. I don't think we can convert everyone to be a collector. But certainly in the 40s, there was a bigger percentage of the population collecting. And they were mostly men. So, now we've doubled the number of potential people because there just weren't as many women collecting. There still aren't as many, but society is just fundamentally different.
Mm-hmm. Hey, what do you think, this seems like kind of a large, multifaceted question, but what do you think philately needs to get more people involved?
Today, there's so many options that we have to choose from. When I was growing up, there were 4 kids. We didn't have a television until 2nd grade, I think. My father traveled extensively. I mean, when we were in New York, he covered all of South America. He went to Cuba all the time. I mean, in those days, that was like a trip. I mean, you didn't have a cell phone. You didn't have a Wi-Fi connection on the airplane. I mean, it was a real trip. And so there was less things to do. So more people were into collecting. My son is now 25, but he was never really a collector, but he did get into Pokemon cards and stuff like that. But I don't think there's just a magic answer. I think there'll always, though, be a group of people who enjoy collecting. You're not going to probably see, I don't see it as an investment, even in this really rare classic stuff. But if you play golf, let's say you're a golfer, and then after 40, 50 years of golfing, you're not going to sell that. I mean, it's a sunk cost of all that. And you got great enjoyment from it.
Mm-hmm.
But in collecting, there's great enjoyment. Plus, there's some residual value. So,
Getting anything back is better than
Right, yeah,
nothing.
I guess it is one of the few hobbies that gives you some monetary compensation for your time as well.
yeah,
You collect
it's
correctly.
again, I don't think people, unless they're really lucky, are going to make money. A good friend of mine here that lives here called a couple of weeks ago. His father's had been a collector, and I get some of these calls. I'm sure you do too. And you're like, it's not worth anything. But he said, but he did exhibit at Cleveland, and I was like, oh, well, then you really should get. Can you send me some scans? And he had an exhibit of Colombian rates, so they were low value. They were not dollar value, high values uncovered, but they were nice stuff. And I'm sure he spent more than he's going to get. But his father had passed away, and they're trying to decide what to do with all this stuff. Interestingly, the other brother called the APS and said, "What do you recommend?" And they actually gave him names of real dealers to go look at it. But so the enjoyment of it is hard to monetize what that is, but economically, it's not a very expensive hobby.
Mm.
Whether you are spending, $500 a month is, I guess, for a lot of people, that'd still be a lot of money. But if you're spending that, or even $300 or $200 a month, you can build a meaningful collection and learn a lot along the way. And that's what makes the hobby interesting. And there are really interesting people in the hobby. They're not like some of my friends think, oh, they must be really weirdos. I said, no, it's just pretty much a cross section of the country.
Yeah, the learning part is massive, because you go down these huge rabbit holes of information that one stamp leads you to another topic, and it's just, I feel like a lot of people are sharing information about the stamps that they buy or collect, as well as just looking for enjoyment out of the hobby in general. They get as much out of sharing it with other people as they do as just collecting for themselves.
I think that's true, but I certainly have enjoyed it, and we've been able to go to a lot of great places. I usually get to go alone to some of these U.S. shows, but not to the stuff in Europe, and the Monte Carlo Club Monte Carlo is really, I mean, that's like almost nothing to do with Fala. It's just a really good time.
Well, we're keeping our fingers crossed for Westpex next year. It'll be good to see you again after all this, and that's always such a great show to begin with. So it'll feel even better after such a long absence. Will certainly make the heart grow fonder with that show.
Well, it is a lot of things. A lot of people you just don't see. I think the people you're close to, you keep in touch with during the pandemic, but there's so many people you're not keeping in touch with.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know right now what I think about whether we can do a show in April or not, because we're not going to do a show where we have table space 6 feet apart. We have one person per table. We can't do that at Westpex.
What are your
We could
usual?
require masks, we could
Yeah.
require temperature checks, but I don't think we can control how many people get to go in, and just
Yeah.
wouldn't work.
What are your usual dealer numbers and attendee numbers for WestPEX?
We get about between 65 and 70 dealers. I don't know I don't know the attendance numbers.
Hmm.
It's not my area,
Yeah.
but we would have been full this last April. We had, we had it all sold and paid for and ready to go.
Yeah.
We haven't, I haven't sent out the bills yet for this year or the next year, the coming show, because I don't want to have to go through the refund and stuff. We have been keeping track. I think we have 60 dealers who said they definitely want to come to WestPEX when the next WestPEX. So that alone is a pretty big show. I don't know
Right.
what they get in Cleveland or in Apex or stuff, but I worry about the dealers. I mean, this is so tough. If you're not an internet dealer, I don't know how they've been surviving.
Yeah, I guess the email lists and the Dana at the ASDA has been working pretty hard to try and get as many people online as possible. But
Right, that's
you know,
good. She's done a good job of that.
yeah,
It's a crazy world.
yeah, yeah.
Well, Gordon, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. This has been fantastic. I didn't know about your own personal history of collecting. Obviously, I know the exhibits and whatnot, but it's great to hear your personal side of the story as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I love the people I associate with in the hobby, and happy to do anything I can. Anyway, you guys take care. Stay safe.
Yeah,
This is the
yeah.
time to really encourage your friends to stay really safe.
Absolutely.
Enjoy the holiday.
And you too, and hopefully we see you at some point in the near future.
I'll be at the next show, reasonable show that actually happens. So
Yeah.
I'll see you there. Thanks for
Thank you
including
so
me.
much.
It's very good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Right.
I thought that was great. I miss seeing Gordon at shows. I don't believe you've ever met him, so that must have been interesting
No.
for you.
Yeah, yeah. I look forward to going to the next show where he's exhibiting to see the collection you talked about.
I really want to see this Prexy exhibit again.
Right.
I'm familiar with his more classic material, but to see the Prexys he's been putting together should be a real showstopper.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm interested to see if he gets that auction house that he's been poking to do a Prexy
catalog
auction.
would be a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
Yeah.
I think that would give them some, I don't want to say legitimacy because they're legitimate, obviously, but give them some clout in the hobby.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Seeing it, I'm assuming it's mostly commercially used covers. No,
Tough stuff to find.
yeah. I do see the examples that he talked about selling. When they sell these covers for $5,000, they always make the cover a lens.
Yeah.
The
I think it's so
Prexy
weird for there to
registered.
be modern, modern in the hobby in philatelic terms. It's weird for that stuff to be bringing big prices like that. So I think it's fun for Lynn's to highlight that because it's stuff that looks like you could have it in your collection.
Yeah,
here
I
it
always
is
get
bringing-
super nervous because I look at the cover and I'm like, oh, did I see 3 of those last week? And of course I probably didn't, but they look so regular,
Exactly. No, I think that's what makes Prexys fun. Most people in the hobby probably remember Prexys. They were phased out with the Liberties in the 50s, but they kind of lingered on. Anybody growing up in the 40s and 50s, that was what you used.
Yeah.
And I think that's got to be cool for people to be reminded of that.
Right, they're seeing stamps that they used as postage as kids sell.
They're seeing I was going to say they're seeing things they could have bought at the post office, bringing $1,500. It's got to.
Yeah, and of course there's other examples of that too, like the lantern issue where Bill Bergstrom was just talking about. The
Not everyone could buy them upside down.
No, they could not.
High value Prexys on commercially used mail. Anyone could have made.
You could do that, yeah. That's the Back to the Future movie I want to see.
Where somebody builds a time machine.
Yeah.
goes and creates a solo franking $5 Prexy cover, mails it to themselves in the year 2020.
Yeah, they just pull open the drawer. Great Scott.
This would be the lowest grossing movie of all time.
No, I mean, if you mail enough of the covers, it could be pretty high grossing. You could just sell the covers.
Or you could just get the sports yearbook with all the scores in it.
Yeah, but where's the fun in that? Sports? I mean, we're talking about stamps here.
Have you seen Back to the Future, then?
Yeah.
Because I just described the plot of the movie.
Right, yeah. But we're on to something else now.
We're on to our next episode.
Right.
That's a good segue there. We're on to our next episode where we are going to be talking to Mr.
Chris Green.
Yes,
of Chris Green Stamps.
Of Chris Green Stamps and of Spink USA.
Yep.
Chris is a great guy, someone I really enjoy seeing in shows. He's one of the younger professionals in the hobby, which is cool. He's like one of us.
Yeah.
And I think he'll be great to talk to.
I'm excited. I'm excited for all of them, but I'm looking forward to this specifically because he's got a retail
What
store.
episodes have you not been excited for?
I think just the ones where it's just me and you.
Why don't you name names? I'm really excited for this upcoming episode.
Yeah.
I want to hear the episode. No, he does have a retail store, and he's it's a newish retail store. It's you know what I mean. It's not somebody who's been doing this for decades and decades. It's somebody again like our generation who is trying to bring that aspect of the hobby back. So I think that'll be really, really neat to talk to him.
Yeah, I think it's going to be incredible to hear his story of his decision to open a retail store. It's in Ottawa, right?
Yes, in Canada.
In downtown Ottawa, and his experience and what he's been going through with the virus, because it's not just the retail store. He has an online store as well.
Yep.
So how he's kind of juggling all those
hats.
Yeah.
Well, you can hear that episode and every episode on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, Podbean, all the different podcast services to pick up our RSS feed. We have a website that is philatelypodcast.com. We have an email that is philatelypodcast@gmail.com.
That's true.
We love feedback. We love... I reactivated my Twitter.
I noticed.
I don't remember my handle, but if you follow Michael, you can see I retweet everything you tweet.
Yeah.
So
I'll just retweet the things that you've retweeted of mine so that people can see
find
your handle.
us.
Yeah.
But I want to get more involved philatelically on Twitter. So
well, doesn't everyone?
That's why Twitter that's why
the dream.
Jack made it. Jack.
Yep. No, Jack
Dorsey.
Yep.
I'm really flexing my tech knowledge here.
Well, we just got off the phone with Gordon Eubanks.
Zoom with a very, very important in the tech world. So follow Michael on Twitter, follow me on Twitter. Next time I say that, I will know my handle so that it will be easier to follow me.
Right. Well, I'll put it in the link in bio.
Twitter link in bio.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like communicating with people. I want to get to know more people in the hobby. I know the people I know. But I want to know more people.
Well, that's a lot of where our guests have come from too. Because I think in his episode, I even admitted it. I'd never met Gary Lowe before.
You've never met a single one of our guests.
and Daisy Todd from last week. I'd never met her. I just found her on Twitter. But
tweet us, email us, Instagram us.
No, those are all the things. Yeah. You can mail us letters at Philately Podcast Street. We're gonna cut that joke.
I don't know where this is going.
Yeah.
So on that note, I will say until next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fun, and we'll chat again real soon.
All right. See ya.
Thanks, Michael.